Ο καλεσμένος μας είναι ο καθηγητής Andreas Jud. Θα κάνω το introduction στην αγγλική για να καταλαβαίνει και ο ίδιος τι λέω για αυτόν. Οπότε, dear Professor Jud is a doctor of epidemiology for child abuse and neglect cases at the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Psychotherapy, University of Ulm in Germany. He is also a staff member at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences School of Social Work in Switzerland. Dr. Jud is the coordinator of the Pan-European network Eurocan, which was a cost action with a duration of 4 years, comprising a network with more than 130 organizations in more than 35 countries around Europe and others, aiming to address child abuse and neglect in Europe cross-sectorally and in a multidisciplinary basis, and to improve the epidemiological and administrative collection of data on child maltreatment phenomenon. Andreas is also the associate editor of the Child Abuse and Neglect, which is the leading international scientific journal in the field of child protection. His speech today is about the challenges in the effort to create commonly accepted definitions regarding the phenomenon of violence against children. We probably should extend the subject for investigation to common definition of on time in Swiss and Greek language, let's say, and understanding. So, Professor Jud, on behalf of the conference committees, I would like to thank you for once more for accepting this invitation and to give you the speech, and we look forward to your insights. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, Sakis has introduced me to Greek understandings of times for quite a while now, so I should have been used to, but I still am not. But no worries. So today I'm presenting you a speech, a presentation that I've entitled Out of Many, One Voice, and I've borrowed the slogan from a very nice country that you can do a quiz where it comes from, because I thought it would be so nice. I will come to the solution of the quiz at the end. Anyway, so as Sakis introduced a critical view, this is a critical view on the challenges to build shared definitions in the context of violence against children, a task that we have tried to, well, not solve, but at least to address in the Eurocan project that Sakis has introduced and has been an essential part of. I've asked ChatGPT to draw me a signpost, because that would help to navigate in the multidisciplinary field of child protection. This is what it is. So we have multiple disciplines involved: social work, pediatrics, psychotherapy, sociology, etc., etc. Law, of course. You have different organizations, child protective services, school social work, psychiatric and psychotherapeutic services, the police, etc., etc. And all of these fields, or all of these disciplines and organizations, have child protection tasks within the multidisciplinary field, and all have their different perspective, their different focus, their different scope that they're looking up. And out of these different scopes, out of the different discourses, do emerge different definitions, different concepts, different terminology. So this multidisciplinary field, I on purpose say multidisciplinary because it's often like multiple disciplines besides each other, and not interdisciplinary because the exchange is often not that interactive, but rather besides, but rather hanging in parallel. So that's why I'm highlighting multidisciplinary and not interdisciplinary. You will see what I mean by that. We have, under the leadership of Franziska Meinck, assembled for an expertise instruments, tools that measure child maltreatment or child sexual abuse. And I've presented the next slide several times, and I often ask people, well, how much do you think, how many instruments that measure child maltreatment, child sexual abuse are available? And they say like 20, 30, 50. Guess what? There are around 134. Well, maybe not that was at the time, now even more, like 130 plus instruments, different instruments that might measure child maltreatment. And so it will come to that. It's no wonder with 130 plus different instruments that the prevalence rates, the frequency of child maltreatment we measure differs respectably. But first, let's have a glimpse at a few of these instruments. That's a table I've translated. We've prepared for the German National Commissioner on Violence against sexual violence. That would be the correct translation. So we have on top widely used instruments internationally, some additional instruments that have only been used or have been used in Germany, and a few instruments, selected few instruments that have been that are specialized on child sexual abuse only. So no worries. I won't discuss each and every single instrument. This is just to give you a glimpse on the variability of these instruments. You might recognize some, maybe the ICAST instruments that has been used in Greece as well, or the JVQ that has been developed by David Finkelhor, or the ACE, that's the WHO's Adverse Childhood Experience questionnaires. So the challenge not even starts with the definitions of child maltreatment, which you can see in the columns 4 to 8, but already with the definition of childhood. Not even a simple term like childhood is considered the same in all the instruments. For the definition of violence, here in this case, we've looked at it from the perspective of sexual violence. The definition of the relation to the perpetrator is essential, and you can see some define it with an age difference. Others define it with an act against the will of the victims. Still, others say it's just any sexual act with a child that is considered child sexual abuse, and some say it does have to involve an authority figure. So it's several approaches, and also in the breadth that we look at, do they include verbal sexualized behavior, yes or no? We have only very few who do include a subjective measure of severity, different approaches to chronicity. Some say, some measure only, has it happened? Yes, no. Some measure, and that is meant by numeric, has it happened once, twice, 3 to 5 times, etc. Or, and only few measure the onset or the duration. So I could go on. I won't dive too much into any of these details, but just to give you a glimpse on the difference in these instruments, and therefore, in consequence, the difference in what will be measured. So here's an example. Already quite a while ago, the WHO did in its WHO European regional section, did an overview on the prevalence rates of the different types of child maltreatment, and you can see that all when it comes to sexual abuse in females, but also in males, you could look at the 5.7% there. But already when it comes to the percentages of prevalence rates in females in Europe, you can see these these T's around the dot here, and it's the variance. It marks the variance around the median or around the mean rate. So this variance is already quite high. It's not surprising when it comes to the different instruments used. But when you go on to emotional abuse, you can see that the variance is even much more extended. So the variance is actually so much extended that you possibly can't say what the middle, the mean or the median is, because the only thing you can say it's the prevalence rates for emotional abuse in Europe are high. That's about it, because the variance is so extensive, and that's I'm highlighting this multiple times to say why, to underline, to underscore why it's so important to have uniform approaches, uniform definitions of child maltreatment, so that we don't, that we can measure the same and actually know what we are looking at, actually have an accurate prevalence rate or incident rate. And the problem, one major problem, it's nice to have a current actual incidence rate or prevalence rate, but even more important, we do need comparability in measures, uniform data to analyze trends. If we have such a huge variance in instruments, in definitions, in approaches to conceptual approaches towards child maltreatment, and we always measure something differently over time, we don't actually know if there is a diminishing trend or even accelerating trend, if there's been more child abuse, more child maltreatment, or fewer child abuse. But it doesn't stop at epidemiology. We have contradicting, because we do not always measure or often do not measure the same. We have contradicting evidence on risks and protective factors. Like, for example, does the definition of child sexual abuse include only caregiver-perpetrated sexual violence, or does it include stranger-perpetrated sexual violence, or does it additionally include peer-perpetrated sexual violence? This is important because obviously the risk factors for stranger-perpetrated or peer-perpetrated or caregiver-perpetrated violence, sexual violence, are not the same. And in consequence, the outcome, the consequences of peer-perpetrated, stranger-perpetrated, or caregiver-perpetrated sexual violence do differ. And this leads also that we have hampered evidence on prevention efforts, therapy outcomes, etc. And to illustrate that, I have illustrated this with a nice picture of two creatures that look pretty much, or that look similar, but are not similar, because on the left we have a mouse and on the right we have a rat. It's not the same creatures, they only look more or less the same, and it's the same problem. We have the same consequences if we just assume it's the same phenomenon we're looking at, but we're measuring actually something that has not the same breadth, is a different focus, different scope, different phenomena included or not. So now I've been highlighting the rationale for why we do need a uniform definition, why it's so important to come from out of many voices, one voice. Next, I will make you familiar with two approaches that have been looking at, and our efforts in the EuroCan project to standardize definitions in child maltreatment. So the first approach to uniform definitions in child maltreatment has been developed by the US Centers for Disease Control, and honestly, I don't know if they ever been able to do such a great thing again. This has been really an effort in 2008 where they put together experts from different disciplines: social work, sociology, psychology, psychiatry, etc. The ones I had at the signpost in the beginning, and their take on the child maltreatment definition was to differ between acts of omissions and acts of commissions. It's quite catchy in English, so I won't dive into the details of it. It's just important. That's been the first multidisciplinary or even interdisciplinary approach to defining child maltreatment. And we have they did differ acts of commissions into failure to provide and failures to supervise, and acts of commission, the acts of abuse. They're probably more familiar with the sexual abuse, physical abuse, and psychological abuse. But here you can already see where it becomes tricky. So we have, under failure to supervise, we have exposure to violent environments. And there, you would also count in witnessing intimate partner violence or witnessing domestic violence if the parents fight. So witnessing intimate partner violence would be categorized here as a form of neglect, while many practitioners say it would categorize it into psychological abuse to witness how the parents fight. So we have, this is one of the big ongoing debates, particularly between practice and research and academia. Others would say it's a category of its own and not to be subsidized under whether it's neglect or psychological abuse. A more recent effort to uniform definitions in the context of violence against children is the International Classification of Violence Against Children by UNICEF. This has been a multi-year effort with statistical offices, with experts around the world to define system on how to measure and compare violence against children internationally, to have uniform data. I'm not sure if you've been introduced to the ongoing studies that I'm aware of are taking place in Greece right now, but Sakis will be able to respond to this. I've just have one illustrative figure here added, just to know for you guys, it's as the name says, this is broader than child maltreatment. So this and the violence against children terminology tries to include all types of violence against children, not just child maltreatment. It subdivides the parts further, and it also includes and specifies child maltreatment as well. But that's for you guys to know. If you're interested in the details, this report, this is openly accessible on the webpage of UNICEF. Sakis has introduced you guys to our Eurocan network on multi-sectoral responses to child abuse and neglect in Europe, incidents and trends. And one of our efforts in trying to improve administrative data in the multiple sectors involved in child maltreatment surveillance has been to try to go at the definitions. And we've included, and this is the next slide, we did a Delphi approach, which is you guys all know where Delphi or Delphi is. This is an expert method to say where you first present to experts, and you can see the expert sample here. From almost every European country, we had one or multiple experts from different fields, from child protective services, psychotherapy, sociology, pediatrics, etc. The disciplines have already been named multiple times. So they've responded to different statements in a first round and said, do you agree with the statement or don't you agree with the statement? And then those statements that expert didn't agree have been refined. They've been presented with other statements. And the goal of this approach is to refine the statements in multiple rounds to reach consensus on the statement, to have a consensus process on definitions that in the end are all shared. So here's the procedures. As you can see, we had in round one 21 statements, 14 consensus already reached, disagreement or it's 15 with consensus, 14 with consensus. Yes, we do agree. 1 consensus. No, we don't agree. And 6 with no consensus. So additional statements have been added, 10 have been modified, and then we came into round 2. Same experts did read the statements again. Now we had 20 statements with consensus, 8 with no consensus, and you can see it's once again been modified until the 3rd round with 31 statements and 26 consensus there. And so you can see, this is an article that has just been published in a high-ranking journal, Lancet European Regional Health, which we're quite proud of. And here is what it looks like. You have in the columns round 1, round 2, round 3 with the participants in brackets, and you have agree and disagree rates, prevalence rates, and so you can see some of the statements, orange marks where we hadn't agreement in the first 2 rounds, and then in the 3rd round agreement. I'll just give you a glimpse. I won't read all these statements right now, but you have, I'll give you a few more seconds to read them. But no, these are just examples of statements. And now we come to the challenges. These are approaches to uniform definitions, and we come to the challenges. And we have yet another and 2 or 3 more statements that I wanted to present you. And now I have, look at this one. The first one says all subtypes of neglect can be characterized as a failure to provide and or a failure to supervise. This has been added in the 2nd round, 90% agreement, 90% agreement in the round 3. But we also have the statement psychological maltreatment should be split into subtypes of psychological abuse and psychological neglect for research and surveillance purposes. Look at it. This is a problem. It's contradictory. So even if we have, and that's one of the big challenges, consensus processes with experts from multiple disciplines, from research and practice, doesn't guarantee you that it's always gonna be logic. It's just gonna provide you consensus. Not necessarily, it's often logic, but not necessarily logic. So there's the problem, which is highly important to note, that it's not necessarily consensus is not the same as contradiction free. So there's the methodological part in the challenges on trying to become one voice out of many. But there's also the research practice gap in use of child maltreatment. I will just illustrate that in two more slides. And even, I would say, even more important are the structures, the established organizational foci, tasks, and structures that are very difficult to alter, like which is connected to the major issues that disciplines and organizations want to keep their power, or in this case, their definitional powers. They're not always that much interested. It's always nice. Nobody is against working with other disciplines to solve or to improve the life of children, but on the same page, also nobody wants to use his or her discipline's power to define the task or the problem they're solving. And this is because tasks and roles are associated with funding, or with not just definitional power, also becomes intertwined with the existence, with the livelihood of a profession, and that's why it's so difficult to alter to alter these existing structures. And I will give you examples on this as well. And it needs a lot of advocacy, political will, and time to change laws or establish new ones. So you need several years and supportive partners to do that. And we're already lagging behind a little bit. I will jump through the next slide to address the research practice gap and provide you with the problem of the double threshold. For research purposes, we have, like, if you enter the room here, the first threshold. For surveillance purposes, we usually ask, the epidemiologist usually asks, does the act or omission qualify as violence? So they measure, they focus in their definition on the act or omission itself, not if it's severe enough. Just the act itself, and to do surveillance on the follow-up is with which consequences is the act connected. Well, that's the approach of research. Practice does usually work in a service with sparse resources, so they have to decide, is the act or omission severe enough to justify an intervention? Shouldn't we better focus our sparse resources on those cases that are most severe? So does one clap on the bottom justify an intervention by Child Protective Services? Most would say probably not. So it's a challenge. Do we already enter the room of child maltreatment at if you look at the pictures in the when we cross the first threshold, or do we enter the room of child maltreatment only when we cross the second threshold? So trying to illustrate that problem with different approaches with a metaphor. And just a reminder on the very different grown structures of child protection is here the sluggish to alter. We did, this is End Corporal Punishment website that does measure how much each country has improved in implementing a ban on corporal punishment in their legislation. So there's still many countries not there. For myself in Switzerland, we have been now 20 years working on that to become finally one of the yellow countries where it's prohibited in all settings. And fingers crossed, we're almost there. But this is just an example to show you how sluggish the structures are, how much time it needs to alter the general perception or to trickle down from what might already have been altered in society's perspective to trickle down to legislation. And now let me come to the conclusion. And you see here a nice picture of Cato, the Roman senator Cato the Elder. And I've put this on because I think one of the major conclusions is Cato used to say at each speech he did, and by the way, I think Carthago needs to be deleted. And that's what I often try to do myself with my speeches, independent of the topic that I'm having a speech on. I'm trying to say, guys, it's so important that we have uniform definitions so we know that we actually speaking of the same. And as a contrast here, I've provided you the Jamaican flag because that's the slogan that I've stolen from. It's out of many one people, out of many one voice that we are trying to achieve here. Oops, that's been too fast. So the conclusions I've just provided you is that we have to sensitize. It's not a very innovative solution, but I think it's one of the only solutions that we have to sensitize our audience on how at each and every possible opportunity to how important uniform definitions are. I know most professionals, most practitioners say, I want to work with the child and I want to help the child. That's what I'm interested in, not those dull definitions. But guys, the definitions are so important because if you don't know what we're actually measuring, we're kind of a ship without a rudder, and we don't know where we're driving at. We don't know where we're navigating at. So that's why it's, in my view, so important that professional networks should start or continue to value definitional work more. We should address, the academicians should address the methodological challenge in the consensus process. So that's what I've referred to, that consensus is not always contradiction free. We should sensitize stakeholders at any opportunity. That's what I've been highlighting before. And if we do that, if the professionals and academia have one voice, I'm convinced that political stakeholders, that the consensus will not go unnoticed that we are there. And now I'm closing here my presentation. And thank you for your attention. And I'm not sure if I will take questions or not.
Thank you too, dear Andreas.